Hi, and welcome to the Keys to Therapy. Today's guest is Dr. Debra. Hi, Debra.
Hi.
So tell the audience a little bit about yourself, who you are and what you do.
Okay, thank you for having me. Thank you so
Yay.
much. I'm so grateful. I'm looking forward to being here. My
Excited.
name, as you said, is I'm Dr. Debra Dantzler, and I am the owner of 3D Psychotherapy,
Very
a
cool.
group practice in Decatur, Georgia. And I'm also the owner of the Clinical Geek Squad, which is a community for intellectually curious clinicians
Ah,
with growth mindset. So, and at 3D Psychotherapy, we work with insecure overachievers to help them bring serenity to their chaotic world. And I've been in practice a long time, but I've been full-time private practice since 2016.
oh, wow. So a while now.
Yeah. And we grew into a group practice about 2 years ago. So yeah, majority of that was, just me solo, and then, uh, you know, brought in some clinicians, and, we have a good community here, and hopefully bringing in some new ones in August. So yeah.
Awesome. How many do you have now?
So right now I have one.
Okay. Nice. But that's a way to start with a group practice. I've seen slash worked at one where they grew too fast and the systems were not in place and things were a little messy. There was no training and stuff like that. So I think the way you're scaling up is smart.
Yeah, it was I had a lot of fear about doing that and taking
Mm-hmm.
the leap. But I started with one, and then, you know, ironed some kinks out, brought in a second one. Then the first one moved on. So it's just the two of us now.
Yeah.
But I feel like we have a lot of good systems in place. And so I feel excited about bringing in the candidates, the
Yeah.
residents later this year.
Oh,
So.
that's awesome.
Mhm.
Well, you mentioned the population you guys work with. So tell us a little bit about who they are. What does that population look like and what do they show up with?
Okay, so great question. So the population we work with, our niche is,
Mhm.
I identify them as insecure overachievers, right? And so what are insecure overachievers and how do they show up? These are humans, adults, who are usually very driven, hardworking. They usually have about 12 plates spinning at any one given time,
Okay.
because they're usually the family fixer, superhero, caregiver, all
Mhm.
of that. And all the weight, they take on all the weight on their shoulders. So they have all these plates spinning at any one given time. And
Wow.
so they're kind of on a constant angst that if any one of these plates falls over, that everything is going to come down and crash, and the ground is going to open up and swallow them whole. So, what does that mean for them in terms of coming into the therapy space? Since they're overachievers, it can be a challenge because
Mhm.
it takes a while. I don't need therapy. I'm the fixer. I
Yeah.
fix everybody else, so I don't need therapy. But I'm you know really scared that these things are going to fall apart. I feel overwhelmed. I feel like I'm always giving, 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 and then giving some more, and
Mm.
nobody is there to kind of give to me. So they come in really close to being like burnt out. And
Mhm.
that's either burnt out in the workplace, burnt out in their family, burnt out in their intimate relationships, because they've given to such an extent, that they're, really frustrated. So it shows
Mm.
up with anxiety. There's usually a lot of times it comes out physiologically, right?
Oh, that makes sense too. Cause that's usually when I've seen the overachiever, cause I see high functioning anxiety, the AP kids and all that stuff. So yeah, I think it usually is when the chest pain and the doctor told me that it's anxiety. That's what gets them in.
Exactly. And they don't really, have a hard time believing it's anxiety, or again, I don't need therapy, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't need therapy, but my GI system is completely jacked,
Good one. Mm-hmm.
right? And so presenting with like a lot of anxious symptoms and sometimes even depressive symptoms, and so what I say is, like, when these they're givers and they're takers, right? And although there can be insecure overachiever takers, the majority that kind of wind up here are those givers. And givers don't know, givers don't have an off switch.
Mm-hmm.
They give, get to empty, and give some more, right?
Oh,
And
yeah.
so, if they keep doing that over and over, I say it ends up one way, one place, right? And it's a dead end street, a
Mm.
cul-de-sac, with three houses at the end of that cul-de-sac. And do you know what those three houses are?
Mm-mm.
Bitterness, frustration, and resentment.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's it. It can
Yeah.
only go there. That's where it ends up.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the thing: when we get to resentment, that's a dead end. Like, there's no way to pull that back, right? Because if we wind up getting to a place of resentment, especially in intimate relationships or at a workplace, if we get there, we lose respect.
Mm-hmm.
And respect it almost can't be restored, you know? And
Yeah.
so I don't want to stay in these absolutes because it's not black and white, but when we get there to that space, it is the lift to get out of it is heavy.
Yeah, they got a lot more work to do at that point because they're so far down the street. It's
Exactly.
gonna take a lot. And who knows which relationships maybe they've damaged in the process with that burnout. Because I've seen a lot of like irritation, agitation, snapping, like a lot of that
Yeah,
stuff. Then it's like they've got to apologize, but they're the ones that were wronged too. So
exactly.
a lot.
Exactly. And so again, with the giver, right?
Mhm.
The insecure overachiever, the giver, um, there's it shows up because there's issues with control,
Mhm.
right? That's kind of really the origin story, which we can talk a little bit more about. But
Yeah.
this control, but they're also the fixer, the family fixer, the family superhero,
Mhm.
right? And so much they perceive all the weight of the world being on their shoulders, and it's heavy.
Mhm.
And so, but they can't see another way, right? This statement's like, well, I can't trust anybody else to get it done.
Mhm.
If I don't do it, it won't get done, right? These
Right.
beliefs that there's this obligation that
Mhm.
they have to perform in order to have worth, have value, be, you know, they earn their keep. So it's a lot of different um, um, factors in that, but they're usually like super successful,
Mhm.
highly driven. And so actually the phrase insecure overachiever was actually coined in the business world.
Oh. Uh-oh.
Yeah. So there was like this study or article. I should have wrote the citation. Forgive me.
People could Google it. It's fine.
And I think it was like Harvard Business Review, and they had done a study of like why there were, why certain employees, exhibited certain behaviors, and basically they, came in early, stayed late, worked, volunteered for extra projects, were self-sacrificing of themselves, their time, sometimes their families, and they kind of coined this employee the insecure overachiever.
Wow. Oh, and I bet bosses love them though.
Oh yeah, I think the article was something like, "Why you want to hire insecure overachievers?"
No. Let's keep perpetuating the cycle and then burn them out and get some newbies in. Oh, yeah, that's a lot. And I feel like you made a lot of good points. And I think it's interesting on the therapy side, especially new therapists. I think when they're first assessing, they're looking for the big problems, right? Because that's what gets the most attention at school. It's, are they hearing voices? Are they suicidal? It's like the very big issues. But stuff like this may not seem big on the surface, but it's a slow burn.
Yes, exactly, exactly. I always say, I ask clients, can you bleed to death from too many paper cuts?
Mm,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So it's
Mhm.
over time, cut after cut after cut. You know, these little, seemingly little things,
Yeah.
but really they're cumulative over time. And if they're negatively impacting your life and your quality of your life and your functioning, then yeah, they're worth addressing, because
Mhm.
that's also a characteristic of the giver. Givers don't know how to take, which is
Mhm.
why it's so hard for them to come to therapy.
Yeah.
They they don't intentionally minimize their experiences. They just honestly don't necessarily see themselves and their problems as being enough
Mm.
to be worthy of the time that to come in the space, you know?
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
I'm sure you've got way more important people to see. I'm sure you could be helping other people, you know, oh, I'm just wasting your time.
Yeah. I had someone a few months ago tell me, no, 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 I don't need to be weekly. I'm not as bad as somebody who needs weekly. I can do every other week. And then now meeting a few times, I'm like, you probably need weekly. But
Yeah.
yeah, they don't see that. And I think part of that goes to the origin story that I wanted you to touch on to go back to, because I feel like that may be where that thought developed.
Yes, yes. You'd asked me how did I stumble upon this niche,
Yeah.
and I literally, I think I would say I definitely stumbled upon this niche in that I started my career many moons ago in the area of addiction, specifically methadone maintenance, right?
Wow.
So I worked at a methadone maintenance program it was on the corner of Little Italy and Soho in Manhattan.
Oh
And so,
gosh.
yeah, I don't know if it's still there. It probably is still there.
Those
Like,
places seem to last forever.
and so started off in addiction. Of course, methadone maintenance is heroin, you know, primary. And then uh, I went from there, and then I went to jail. Yeah, I worked for the New York State Department of Corrections.
You're on the other side of the bars.
Yes.
The good side. Okay.
And so I was a substance abuse counselor in for New York State Department of Corrections. And
Wow.
then you know, so I was in the field of addiction in a bunch of different areas for double-digit years.
Geez,
And
that's hard work.
yeah, but yeah, I'm very passionate about that work, the field of addiction, because it's just when the hope is restored, it's like nothing else, like,
Oh.
you know. And so oh, how do we get here? um so some of the hardest stuff over the course of the years
Hmm.
was not just working with the person who has the disease of addiction, but was seeing and witnessing the pain of the people in the spiral of the tornado, right? They're the center of
Hmm.
the tornado, and so the friends, family members, spouses, children that were impacted by the disease of addiction. And and so always, you know, wanted to work more with them. And then when I transitioned from, so right before going full-time in private practice, I was the executive director of a residential drug and alcohol program for homeless men. And
Wow.
so when I went to private practice, obviously, like, this is, you know, ASAM level 1, right? So it is not the level of care appropriate for somebody who's in an active addiction.
Hmm.
So,
Wait, can you say what ASAM is for the little
oh,
baby therapists out here who are learning? I
yeah.
remember my handout for my old job, but see if you could real quick side note.
So ASAM is the American Society of Addiction Medicine, so ASAM. And so ASAM, the American Society of Addiction Medicine, has what we call levels of care,
Mhm.
right? And it goes from really 0.5 or 1.0 or 1 up to like 7. And
Mm.
7 would be what we'd like call like detox. And then you have a set of the 3s, which are inpatient and residential treatment, so very intensive.
Mhm.
And the 2s, you have outpatient, intensive outpatient, and partial hospitalization. So ASAM says that when we do an assessment, we want to make sure that we are placing somebody in the appropriate level of care at the lowest level possible to be successful. And then if they are unable to maintain sobriety at that level, then they need to go up in their ASAM level.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, because that hasn't been talked about at all yet. So I'm like, oh, hold on, let's hit that point. Because I had a flash when you said ASAM, I could see the handout, but I haven't worked with it in so long. I'm like, that's a good one. So yes, using that as like a reference point for what level of care for any of the therapists that are working with substance abuse, make sure if they haven't been provided that they haven't.
Exactly, because if you're working in substance abuse, you need to know what ASAM level you're working at.
Yep.
Right.
Perfect. So yeah, and like you were saying, going to private practice, that's not really appropriate for the majority of the substance abuse population.
Exactly. The disease of addiction would require more intensive, a higher level.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to kind of, pivot and make a shift in that, because my background is addiction and I have I hold the master addiction counselor credential and everything like that. When people were looking for therapists, they usually, like, what usually came across my way was those friends and family members of people who have the disease of addiction.
Yeah.
And so I started seeing them, and as I started working with this population, I started to notice these trends and these patterns in their behavior, right? That more often than not, they were very high achieving.
Mm-hmm.
More often than not, they were that family, we talk about family roles, right? They were the family fixer or the superhero of the family. They more often than not, were quite parentified,
Mm-hmm.
taking on responsibilities well beyond their age in a lot of situations. So there were these patterns, and also the things on the other end of what was happening for them when they were showing up, right? That having, like I said, those kind of 12 plates spinning, this kind of feeling of everything is on me and I have to make sure that everything's okay. If not, then the ground's going to open up and swallow me whole. So those were the patterns I noticed of these friends and family members. And so I started doing like some more research and kind of thinking and exploring more, and started identifying that humans, all of us, right? When we are in we're in unstable or chaotic, uncertain, challenging, foundational, spaces.
Mm-hmm.
So that could be, parents could be drinking or using drugs. It could be a sibling that's drinking or using drugs, but there's some sort of constant sense of chaos or uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
And so what do we do as humans when we're in a space where we feel that uncertainty?
Yeah, we're going to want to find some kind of control somewhere so we have a leg to stand on. When the ground's shaky, you're just trying to stabilize yourself.
Exactly, exactly. So if it's unstable, we want to grab onto control, right?
Mhm.
And we want to grab onto whatever we can control. Now, mind you, we're small humans, right? We're not
Mm.
able to be independent. This is our environment. And so we can't control if mom and dad are fighting. We can't control if the police are coming. We can't control if, brother passes out from, drinking or using or whatever. We can't control that. But what can we control, right? And so when we, wind up finding that thing for us that we're going to control, we usually see that it's going to go into one or two categories. Again, nothing's black and white, but for the more often than not, right? We're going to have things that we can control that are going to be perceived as, say, antisocial,
Mhm.
right? And this could look like substance abuse ourselves. It could look like other high risk behaviors. It could look like criminality. It could look like an eating disorder. It could look like any, thing that is, as society would say, don't do that, right?
Mhm.
Right. And then, or it could go in the way that's prosocial. And what does that look like if we go and try to control things in a prosocial way? What
Mhm.
that's going to look like is high academic achievement. It's going to look like maybe the star athlete. It's
Mhm.
going to maybe look like the youngest manager ever at the Dairy Queen. It's going to look like it's going to be some leadership positions. It's going to look like this achieving, right?
Mhm.
And what we know is what gets rewarded gets repeated, right? And it is very easy for pro-social things to get rewarded,
Oh
right?
yeah.
A
And
child that's parentified but excelling. Oh,
mhm.
you're so mature for your age. Oh, you did such a good job. Oh my goodness, look at that. You're out here running your own business at 15. These
Yep.
things, this praise that we get rewarded, and we get those dopamine hits. And
Yeah.
here we are off to the insecure overachiever race.
Definitely. Because that might be the only time you hear praise, right? If everybody else is so chaotic, that may be the only
Exactly.
time you get attention in general, actually.
Mhm. Exactly. Exactly.
Wow.
I was actually giving this talk at this place one time about this, and
Mhm.
one of the gentlemen in the audience said, "So what's wrong with that?"
Sir, I think you need some therapy to figure out the answer to that. Because I bet you got some symptoms that are showing up that you don't know. Wow.
And I'm like, you know, nothing's a problem unless it's a problem, right?
Yeah.
Right? There's nothing wrong with um being driven.
Mm-mm.
There's nothing wrong with achieving or being hardworking or, caring for other people. There's nothing wrong with that. It becomes a problem when we're so driven that we're self-sacrificing,
Mm-hmm.
when we're so giving that we're not meeting our own needs or don't even recognize we have our own needs,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's a problem when we're working from dawn to dusk, Monday through Sunday, and don't allow ourselves to have healthy relationships, partnerships. And then we find ourselves at, 45, 50, 55, unpartnered, childless, right? And not that there's anything wrong with that,
Mm-hmm.
but if that's not what we really wanted, then that's not a place we want to find ourselves.
Right. And that
Right?
would be the people that like the careeraholics or workaholics, right? Like that may be all they have because that's where they're getting the most praise and feedback.
Exactly, exactly. And thing is, again, not a problem unless it's a problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And and then, because if it wasn't a problem, they wouldn't be in this space. But it has to be showing up in some other ways for
Mm-hmm.
them to make it to this space. And like we said before, a lot of times the way it shows up is in the body.
Mm-hmm.
oh, my tummy, oh, my head, migraines, oh, my, blood pressure.
That's a big one.
We cannot separate the mind from the body.
No.
It shows up. If we are driving ourselves so much, then, we're going to have physiological issues. We're going to have even if it's as innocent as it interrupts our sleep. Sleep is the foundation of the foundation of the foundation of all good health, right? So if we're not getting adequate restorative sleep consistently, that's going to show up. And then we're not going to be able to function. So another way that people come into the space is, I don't know what's wrong with me. I used to be able to do all of this, and now I can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
Something is wrong, right?
But I like that, because that was part of what I was going to ask is, with therapists coming in, what questions should they be asking, or what things should they be assessing for? Because I bet, and I've heard people say this before, oh, somebody came in for an assessment, but they just seem to be doing well. So I told them to work on stuff with their pediatrician or whatever, right? Their pediatrician, their doctor, their whoever, go do some yoga, kind of give them like basic things without thinking that they qualify for therapy. So I feel like sometimes folks like this, because they are so successful, certain things may be missed in an assessment.
Yes, I think that's a really great point. And it's so true. It's so true, right? And oftentimes I hear so many of my clients saying the same, like this, that they say, they in those chaotic formative spaces, their needs weren't getting met. And then they might have a conversation with a caregiver, parent later down the line, or somebody, and the parent almost always says something to the effect of, oh, well, I knew I didn't have to worry about you. You had it together. You had it, right? I knew you were going to be okay. I didn't have to do that for you, right? And that, so the idea that because somebody's presenting this way, that they don't have needs, that that their pain, their anxiety, that these issues are less valid. No, it's not, I think your question was, what questions or what can somebody look for in an assessment?
Yeah.
Especially if somebody's coming in and going, I don't even know.
My doctor made me come here because my blood pressure, like you mentioned.
Exactly. Like, I don't know what, we want to start with the tangible, right?
Okay.
Because again, they don't necessarily believe it. So how is this impacting you? Right? Oh, no, it's, it's not impacting me. Okay, so work is fine. You're never missing work. Work is good. You're not feeling, there's no conflicts with coworkers. There's always conflict. Because the coworkers can't work as hard as they do. So there's always conflict with coworkers.
Right. Whether they think that the coworkers are lazy or they think this person's a suck up or whatever.
Yeah.
That's a really good question about the coworkers, because that's not going to be in a typical assessment. So with those people, you've got to that population, got to dig deeper, right?
Exactly. Yeah. What do your family members say about you? How do they describe you? Right? Are there any, tell me about the last conflict you might have had with your significant other. What was that about? Oh, it was about, they, put out the trash wrong. We're going to hear a lot of things with control. My way or the highway. It has, like a lot of issues of control are still showing up, because for that young version of them, if they didn't control, they didn't know if they were going to be safe the next day. It's safety. So they're still trying to exert methods and techniques that they use to keep themselves, the small version of them, safe on their adult life, where they're already safe. But they don't know that, because they're still trying to control it.
Yeah.
The coworkers, trying to control the spouse, trying to control the children, trying to control
the garbage.
Exactly.
All of it, down to
the
the
garbage out wrong, right? Like,
right,
that work.
right. If you take it out of my house and I don't have to touch it, you're doing it right. So yeah, but that's really good because again, I feel like sometimes, especially with new therapists, you get the assessment questions from whatever agency or place you work at. Stuff like that is not going to be on it. There's certain things you have to dig with deeper, or there may be one question about physical, appetite, sleep, health issues or medications. And that's it. That's all you're seeing on the basic assessment. So
Yeah.
maybe diving in a little bit deeper to some of the physical stuff, because like you said, it shows up there a lot.
Yeah. And so 3D psychotherapy, we our theoretical orientation is psychodynamic.
Mm,
So our assessment, like when I tell somebody we're about to do an assessment, I say, we're gonna go way back. I'm gonna get the
mhm,
story of Samantha from day one to present.
mm,
So we go and, because really we're looking for patterns across time, right?
yeah.
So that's where we'll see it very clearly.
Hmm. But I like that too, because it sounds like you're exploring like family of origin stuff and not just symptom based. Because a lot
Exactly.
of assessments are checklists, right? And again, as a new therapist, you're sitting there going, I don't even know if these are the right questions to ask. So you're just following whatever they give you.
Yes.
So that's a good point, is look at like family of origin, ask a lot of questions about childhood, not just trauma, but maybe like family structures.
Yes. Family structures, relationships,
Okay.
um, interrelationships, right? Like, we might say, I think a common question on most assessments is, what was your relationship like with your mom or something like that,
Mhm.
right? But what was your sister's relationship like with your mom?
Oh, stories I've heard. That would be a great question because you get all the tea then.
We get
Yeah.
things we ask, right?
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so in the way I approach assessment is assessment is not just a checklist. It's not
Mhm.
for the insurance company or to check the documentation. When we do an assessment, it is our first step in building that deep therapeutic rapport.
Mhm.
That's its purpose. The purpose of the assessment is to build the therapeutic rapport, right? It's not just to get the data.
Yeah.
Because if it's just to get the data, give them the form, let them fill it out and put it in the chart, right?
True. Yeah. And I don't think a lot of people realize that because there's the pressure, right, of the documentation and getting everything done. And like you mentioned, insurance and,
Mhm.
depending on where you're at, there may be a 24-hour deadline to get your note in. So they're like, I've got to go through the checklist to make sure I answer everything. And sometimes the report can get lost amongst
Yeah.
that.
So when I was teaching assessment, I would tell people, again, it's the goal is the rapport.
Mm-hmm.
So the assessment always should be conversational,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we should stay and operate from a position of curiosity. Oh my God, who is this new human in front of me? What do I
Yeah.
get to learn about them today? Oh my gosh, and just really stay in that curiosity, and you'll find out so much more, a gazillion times more than any checklist could ever tell you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's important to memorize the checklist because you want to make sure you can be able to hit all the points,
Mm-hmm.
but you shouldn't, you can't rely on the paper. You can't rely on the paper.
Mm-mm.
The paper is literally a wall that blocks the therapeutic report.
Absolutely, yeah. And I know that that's a lifeline to some newbies because they
Mm,
just don't know. So, I mean, I think it's like you said, get comfortable memorizing the questions. I think is a really good point because you want to be able to have it flow. And sometimes you could be like, oh, I heard you mention something about this. Can we go back to that really quick and kind of turn it if there was a little bit more that you noticed you needed to get info in, but also may have been helpful.
yes.
So instead of it just being okay,
Mhm.
and then, because I think this population, if they're already thinking that they probably don't need therapy in the first place, if
Mhm.
you're just going through a checklist, they're not going to see the value in it either.
Exactly, exactly. It's the it would not serve them. They would just be like, okay, this is just like any other doctor's appointment. They're going through a checklist, and yeah, yeah. And the thing is, the other thing I say about assessment is the first appointment may be called the initial assessment,
Mm-hmm.
But assessment never ends.
Mm-hmm.
It is ongoing, right? Especially in those first 2, 3, 4 sessions as we're building that rapport.
Yeah.
Because one thing with psychodynamic, we're literally bringing them all the way back, right?
Mm-hmm.
The amygdala and hippocampus, they have not yet, they're not yet, we're priming it. We're just priming it at that point, right? It's not till the second or third session that they come in and go, oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Especially if it's stuff they've never talked about before, which is most likely the case with most of them because they've thrown themselves into work or school or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And that's really helpful because, again, I think there's so much pressure in that first session that sometimes rapport might get lost for people and they want to get the documentation. They want to do everything right instead of just being a person first and then a
Yes.
therapist second.
Yes. Yes. Which is why I think that this is such a wonderful space that you've created and cultivated for these newbies and the young therapists, because this is like giving them like so much advanced information. Like I I remember being a really like a new therapist and just having to figure everything out
Yeah.
on my own, and just being awkward with the client. And oh my god, I could tell you some stories like shame
Oh.
stories, like
Mm-hmm.
things I am ashamed I did in the name and said I was a clinician, right? Especially working with addiction. Because when I came into addiction, I didn't know heroin from cocaine, from benzodiazepines. I didn't
Yeah.
know any of this stuff. And I told this one client something that, they should perhaps how to manage this withdrawal situation.
Yeah.
And they literally wanted to murder me.
Oh no.
They were like, that's not how heroin works.
Yeah.
Huh?
And you don't know what you don't know either, right? Until you're in it.
You don't know what you don't know. And so stay curious.
Mm-hmm.
I think I learned from clients. Not just
Honestly, that's where the most things I learned came from, not school. Like it was on the job training, and some of them would tell me something. I mean, anything from building my clinical skills to I did a partial hospitalization group. And I remember this one lady, she never spoke in my group, just
Mhm.
never spoke, was in the corner, very detached. And we were just making small talk before we were gonna, like after lunch, before we were gonna start the next lesson. And one of my clients said, "What you making for dinner tonight?" And I said, "I don't like cooking, maybe something in the crock pot." And the one person who never spoke said, "Make sure you get a crock pot liner." I said, "What is that?" And she's like, "It's a plastic bag you put in the crock pot so that you don't have to clean it as much. It's a lot simpler." And I was like, "I'm gonna look for that." Let me tell you, I used one twice this week already, and it's been 10 years, 10 years since she told me that. So it may be life stuff and it may be clinical stuff, but listen to your people.
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, which is why I love that approach as well, the psychodynamic, because it really is, it's that in narrative therapy, I feel like you
Yeah.
just get so much more of a rich, full picture of this human.
Yep.
Other techniques are more like you said, a symptom checklist.
Mm-hmm.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your anxiety? On a scale of
Yeah.
1 to 10, how depressed have you been?
Right. Or they hand out those screeners, just like yours, like the GAD or PHQ-9, any of those screeners for anxiety, trauma, depression. And somebody's like, "Oh, okay, they scored this." But like you said, for anxiety, a lot of those symptoms on there are mental. Maybe they're feeling it more physically. And that's not on there.
Yeah, yeah. Of course, we're in a insurance-based practice, so we do our PHQ-9, we do our GAD-7,
Yeah.
but we don't like it's not.
The be all end all.
It's another data point
Mm.
in our discovery of who this person is.
Right. Yeah. And it could be a good measure to track, right? 6 months later, give it to them and see if their scores have changed. But I
Mhm.
think some people go, "Oh, this says that they don't have depression." And it's
Exactly. Yeah.
so they don't ask questions geared towards that.
Yeah.
Mm. Well, is there anything in particular that maybe any trainings you've had, things that you've read, anything that you found that's been maybe more helpful with working with this population?
So there are a couple of resources that um, I I think like are sort of my kind of go-to resources for the most part. Um, and they span the gamut from more like textbook stuff to more uh, um, popular stuff.
Mm.
So I since you asked the question, I brought some things.
Oh, yay.
So my my one that I absolutely love is the Four Agreements
Ah, okay.
by Don Miguel Ruiz. And so the reason I love the Four Agreements is um so the Four Agreements are the first one is be impeccable with your word.
Mm.
And a lot of times, the giver, right, because they can't take, they have difficulty taking compliments,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there's a lot of that inner critic is like, you know, it's like the majorette at the in front of the marching band. It's like, I am the
Mm-hmm.
inner critic, right? It's always telling them bad stuff, like you're not good enough, or you're this, or you're that. So be impeccable with your word, even if that's your inner word, to other people and to yourself, right? And the second one, which is really important for them as well, is don't take anything personal,
Mm.
right? Because that early chaotic environment, I had to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
I had to break mommy and daddy up. I had to pick mommy up off the floor and clean up the vomit. I had to fix it, right? So everything is my fault. Everything is my responsibility. Anything that happens out here has to be because of me. So no, it's not personal. Let's
Mm-hmm.
let that go. Don't take anything personal. Um, and then the third one is don't make assumptions.
Oh, that's a good one. That's
Yeah,
everybody needs that one.
yeah, don't make assumptions, right? We're filling in all the blanks, creating our own narrative, like, this is why they did that, right?
Yep.
And then the four agreements is always do your best, right?
Oh.
So that's that one. And then this one is Kristen Neff's self-compassion and the power of being kind to yourself.
Hmm.
And then again, give, control, right? What does that usually lead to? Boundary issues.
Oh, always. Yeah.
So this is my new absolute favorite book on boundaries. It is Nedra Tawwab's book, Set Boundaries, Find Peace.
I follow her Instagram.
Love her, right?
Yes. Her lipstick's always popping too. I love her. But she
Yeah,
breaks it down into like real concepts. It's not very textbook, like you said.
exactly. And then so something more on the textbooky side,
Mhm.
a lot of, a lot of times, sometimes more often than not, in that early chaotic environment, this is when, I mean, those are the stages, those are the ages that John Bowlby studied, right?
Oh,
So
yeah.
what happens during that time? Our attachments can get jacked up. So this one is definitely more textbooky,
Mm.
but treating attachment disorders from theory to therapy. So those are just a couple that I go to quite frequently.
Yeah. And I like how the textbook one, I feel like could be really good for the foundational piece because we typically have to explain a lot of the attachment stuff and the patterns. Some of it may be very triggering for people. So it's probably really good that we would have some of that background because that's not taught in school. At least I wasn't taught anything about attachment theory. Typically, maybe a little bit. No, I lie. Bowlby was the ducks. So I had maybe one little thing, and this is why it sticks in my head was here's how the baby ducks imprint. And that was the only thing I was taught about that. That's why that's the only thing I remember about that. So that wasn't one that was really, in my program at least, wasn't delved into a lot, but it shows up for everybody.
Yes, yes.
It's crazy.
Yeah. So the attachment, the boundaries, and
Yes.
yeah, those are the
Everybody.
things that, yeah. Mhm.
So, and I like how the other books are stuff that you could read with clients. So
Yes, I do a lot of bibliotherapy.
mm,
So I, if we're reading, we're discussing, we're breaking down, I'm giving them the scientific stuff behind what they're reading. And so,
yeah,
so it's yeah.
I love that, because then that gives the therapist tools that they can buy right now and read and educate themselves on these topics that, again, probably weren't discussed much, if at all, in their programs. And
Yeah.
then they can use this with clients and work with them in sessions as homework or whatever else, reading and discussing it, and even possibly introducing for the client, introducing these concepts to other people in their lives. Because stuff like boundaries is hard.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is. Just, it's hard. It's hard for everybody to set boundaries, but it's really hard for these insecure overachievers to set boundaries because they were told they weren't allowed to set boundaries, and punished sometimes for setting boundaries, or their boundaries were just violated and just bulldozed over. So it's like, why bother to try to set boundaries? Because people are just going to keep taking, no matter what.
Yeah. Or people may have rejected them if they set them too, right? The takers, like you said, if a giver's setting a boundary, takers don't like that.
Exactly. So yeah, they fear rejection. They feel like if they set a boundary, then they're gonna, they won't be worthy, because they're giving that messaging that you have to earn your space here in this family. So if you don't do, then you're not worthy.
Right.
Gosh forbid, so.
You have, I don't know, some kind of the say in what happens in your life or anything else. Not allowed in certain.
Right. God forbid you have your own life and meet your own needs and get your own supportive people who love you unconditionally. Yeah. Hey,
Yeah. No, do that on your own time, which I don't let you have because I'm taking all your time.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I know we talked about the assessment piece, but are there any other techniques or strategies or anything else that you recommend that new therapists do or know when working with this population?
Patience.
Okay.
It's one, psychodynamic is a slow process. Um, but a lot of times, especially for the new therapists, right? We want, one, we haven't become comfortable with our own discomfort. And when clients come in with their discomfort, we want to fix it really quickly.
Yeah.
Here, do this DBT worksheet and you're done tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right?
I feel good because I had a tool to give you. I know you got homework. We're better.
Yeah. And so become comfortable with your own discomfort so that you can stay present with the client longer. So that way you can stay curious with the client. And like Elliot Connie says, he's like, the client, they already know, like they already have all the tools within them to get to the space of healing that they want to get to. Right. We, as I tell my clients, they're like, oh, thank you for what you did. Like, no, you're driving your bus. I'm just sitting in the passenger seat with the map.
Right. Yeah. I like to use Wizard of Oz too. Like I'm just Toto. I'm like hanging out with your Dorothy. You had the heels on the whole time.
Exactly. I love that. I'm so used to that one. Yes.
Yeah. I just love dogs. So I'm like, where can I bring a dog in? That's it. But that's true. They have a lot of it. They've survived however much they've been through in their lives. They definitely got it. They just haven't applied it in the right space.
Yes. These are, we can, say either parts of them or strategies for them or whatever it is. They worked for them at one point because they survived. They're here, right? Now giving themselves permission to put those things down.
Yeah.
It's a big ask.
Absolutely.
They can't do it if they don't trust the space to do it. And that's where that rapport comes in. That's where that connection comes in.
Yeah, I was gonna, when you mentioned uncomfortable, the thought that came to my mind was resistance, because I bet you a lot of these clients in the beginning of coming to therapy have a lot of resistance of letting go of these patterns and behaviors that they've known and have worked for them in some capacity in their
Oh
lives.
gosh, yes. So many times they hear the messaging when I talk about givers and takers, and but
Yeah.
you know, giving, it's like, oh, I couldn't be selfish. I couldn't, the
Mhm.
idea that it's almost like they think we're saying you can't be you anymore.
Yeah.
It's that extreme. Like they think they cannot be themselves anymore.
Mhm.
No, you can be yourself. You can give, but you just have to learn to set these boundaries so that we're not giving into the deficit and then go down that cul-de-sac with bitterness, frustration, and the resentment house,
Mhm.
because that don't feel good down there. And we
Right.
know it.
Exactly. Yeah. So maybe starting slower with some of them as you're meeting that resistance, not giving up or not over pushing them, because that's going to cause them to not come back. But so, and that goes back to the patience you were saying.
Yeah, yeah,
That
yeah.
makes sense. Well, are there any additional tips or anything else you could think of about working with this population? You covered a lot.
I can't think of any additional tips. I just love what I do, and I'm glad that I got a chance to come in here and hang out with you and talk about it.
Hey, me too. Because I feel like everything you were saying is just so helpful. And I love that it's from a different perspective. How even though what you shared about your career, how it pivoted, where it was like, here's all this time in substance abuse.
Mhm.
And then it was like, well, here's another, side of it. It's the people
Yeah.
who've maybe been affected by some of it, or even possibly people that are addicted to other things that aren't necessarily
Oh,
substances.
yes.
So
Yes, that is true. Uh-huh.
yeah, so I feel like sometimes people feel like they need to find a niche right away, or, oh, well, I have all this experience in this area, I should stay with it. But you've proved you can pivot and still thrive.
Yeah, I feel like it just evolves naturally and organically.
Mhm.
Uh, and so, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, trust the process.
that's the process.
Well, is there anything that you're working on, anything that you want to promote or share?
We have, so under the Clinical Geek Squad, which is, a community for clinicians that just get geeked up about doing this work, like you're talking about, right? We have an accountability club, and that meets every other week. And, it's a space with other geeked out clinicians who are looking and working on various projects. And
Cool.
so we just kind of there, support each other, offer resources, support, feedback. And so we have a Tuesday edition and we have a Friday edition. And so
Nice.
they every other week. And then yeah, and that's it. And you can find information about that on my socials.
Yeah,
And yeah, if
perfect.
anybody.
Because I'll link everything below. So then everybody can follow you, see what you're up to, look more into the Geek Squad, and see what else is coming down, because you're working on some stuff. So
Yeah.
there'll be more to come. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out today to do this. I really, really appreciate it. And I feel like you had such a really good perspective that is different and unique, and you came at it all from a different angle than what we've heard before. So I really appreciate that.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Samantha, for having me. I'm so grateful. This has been so much fun.
Yay. Oh, I'm so glad. Well, everybody follow Deborah below. If you want to continue to watch what I got going on in this channel, then subscribe below as well. And I'll see you next episode.